We're in business. So we had to switch it up a little bit and switch over to the laptop. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to see questions, um, but I have lots of questions. So
Okay.
I'll probably over for those, and I hope to answer as many of the questions as the people normally ask. So I want to say welcome everyone. BWISE, or Black Women in Science and Engineering, is focused on empowering Black women in these STEM fields and giving us information that really can help us further our career, whether that be in corporate, academia, or entrepreneurship. So whenever we can find out, about people who are doing some incredible things, I always like to bring them on, let them promote the book, and share just, the wealth of information that they have. So this week, actually, with it being the holiday, was kind of a whirlwind, but I saw that Duchess's book was coming out, and I immediately jumped on it and say, hey, you want to come on this show? And she was so kind to agree to come on the show. So I want to say thank you, Duchess, for coming on with such short notice. Everybody is so excited to talk to you, and me as well. This is a phenomenal, piece of history that I think it's past due for people to know about. So I'm so excited about your book and hearing all about this. So I'm going to give a brief introduction. I'm going to try to pick and choose and not read your entire lengthy
Yeah, that's
um,
fine.
background. I'm just going to pick the highlights or what I see people probably would love to know about you. So Duchess Harris is an African American academic, author, and legal scholar. She is professor and chair of American Studies at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, specializing in Black feminism, U.S. law, and African American political movements. Her book, Feminist Politics from Kennedy to Obama, was published in 2009. And with Bruce Baum, she co edited Racially Writing the Republic: Races, Race Rebels, and Transformations of American Identity. Wow, such timely subjects, Doug.
Yeah.
How did you know 3 years ago to be writing these books? It's incredible. Um, so just very accomplished. In 2001, she received her JD, Juris Doctorate, from William Mitchell College of Law. Her most recent text, Black Lives Matter, is co-authored with Sue Bradford Edwards. And she was the 2015 recipient of the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers. Um, when she was 14, I'm skipping to your education, she received an academic scholarship to attend Canterbury School in New Medford, Connecticut. After graduation, she was admitted to the University of Pennsylvania and elected student body president. So she has a very accomplished background, you all. So this is just incredible. So she earned her Bachelor of Arts in American History and Afro-American Studies from University of Pennsylvania, which is an Ivy League school for those of you who may not know.
Go red and blue.
And in 1997, she earned her PhD in American Studies from the University of Minnesota. So that same year, she was named one of 30 Young Leaders of the Future by Ebony Magazine. So just an incredible wealth of experience and knowledge. And that's how she's able to write all these incredible books. And we're going to talk about the most recent one, which, for those of you who are joining us tonight, you'll know this isn't even on the bookshelves yet. So you guys are getting a preview, and we want you to go and buy all that you can for yourselves, for the children in your lives, hopefully. School systems will also, I don't know if you're working on that. I'll help you promote that here tonight.
Excellent.
Hopefully
Thank you.
will be interested because it is really an important story. And I think for people who, follow, education, and certainly most recently STEM education, we didn't know, the accomplishments of women, 50, 60 years ago. And I guess if you, weren't connected to them either, by blood, right, you wouldn't necessarily know these stories. So it's just incredible, the work that you've done uncovering all of this. And then, to have a grandmother, which is amazing to me, that accomplished so much. So without further ado, Duchess is going to talk about her most recent book. And hold it up, Duchess, so everybody knows.
All right, here it is. And
This,
I got it today. It's
she got it
volume one.
today. She got it today. Hidden Human Computers.
The
And
Black Women of NASA.
thank you, the Black Women of NASA. And so you all, there's this is an incredible story. There's opportunity to learn, about this and moving forward. But go get Duchess's book, right? We must support our Black authors, and especially when they have such compelling stories. So, Duchess, tell us how you started this. Because this was a project that has
Oh,
turned into
yeah.
a book. Is that correct?
Actually, the story, of course, is my life story, but I've been working on this for 3 years.
Okay.
So, the way this came about essentially was I was named after my grandmother. My legal name is Miriam. Everyone calls me Duchess. And I was told stories my whole life about who she was and what she did. But like a typical kid, I completely blew it off and didn't think it was important. I
Mhm.
was named for her after she passed away. And so I didn't know her.
Okay.
And when I went to college and I majored in African American history, it wasn't until that moment that I did the math and realized what she was doing when she was doing it,
Mhm.
that it would have been unheard of.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. For women in general, but certainly an African American women to be working. Most of the people that I know that had advanced degrees were working in education. My mother
Right,
was an educator. A lot of my female relatives, certainly in the deep South, were educators. That was the pinnacle educational career if you
right.
go to college. So just to know that she was in math, it's just amazing. So you have been working on this book for 3 years, and did it kind of write itself? Were the because it's focused on the work of your grandmother, right? Are there any
Mhm.
other
Actually,
women?
it's focused on the history of the Black women that worked at the different branches of NASA. So my
Okay,
grandmother was at the Langley NASA in Virginia, but my book also looks at people that were in Alabama, people who were
got
in Maryland, like all over.
got it, got it. So was Langley kind of the epicenter? I mean, with it being in Virginia.
Definitely, definitely. So I will tell you the story of how it came about. So I am a professor at McAllister College, as you said, and academics have three ranks. They have assistant professor, which is untenured. Then when you
Mhm.
get tenured, you become an associate professor. After
Okay,
that, at my institution, you have to wait at least 5 years before you go up to promotion for full professor.
okay,
So I went up for promotion for full professor in 2013, and I was granted the full professorship, which came with a sabbatical. And
okay,
so I spent the 2013 14-year mapping out and thinking about what I wanted the book to look like. I applied for a grant from the Virginia Humanities Council, and I applied for that grant with Margot Lee Shetterly. So it's a
okay.
really interesting story. So I had contacted the archivist at NASA years before. Margot had as well, but she knew her. And so
Mhm.
Margot had been putting feelers out in the Virginia area for relatives of the computers. And my first cousin, who of course we had the same grandmother, got the email and said, that she's older than me. She remembers our grandmother, but that I had more of the historical framework for it and that Margot and I should meet.
Mhm.
And so we met, and then we applied for this grant. And then I brought one of my students to go to Langley NASA the summer of 2014. And so we spent just in one day, 5 hours in the archives, tours of the campus, and I got to see where my grandmother would have worked, and it helped me understand how segregated the space was.
Got it. Got it. Wow, that's just amazing that, you went 50 years without this story, really having a lot of exposure. And then in the period of 3 to 6 years, all of this was able to be uncovered. So that's just amazing.
Exactly.
That's just amazing.
Exactly. Yeah, and I really celebrate Margot's work. As you know, she's trained as a journalist, and so she wanted to do a book for adults, which of course was adapted into the screenplay.
Mhm.
My experience in the classroom is that students show up to college with a disadvantage because they haven't learned things in junior high and high school.
Right.
And so my good friend Sue Bradford Edwards, who writes young adult books for a living, like she does that all day, every day, and just pushes these books out. She and I had collaborated on the Black Lives Matter book last year. And
Okay.
so I approached Sue and I said, I have all the research, I have the outline, I have the framework. Can you help me with the language so that this is at an 8th grade level? Because my other books that you mentioned, of course, are much more highbrow scholarship.
Got it. Got it. And children are interested in the innovative and the new, right? So
Exactly.
things that, oh my gosh, I never heard of that, that catches their attentions. And we know certainly with millennials, you can't have something long drawn out that's going to take, a while before the good, exciting part happens. You really have to have something that catches their attention right away. So that's just amazing. That's just amazing. So, tell me a little bit more about your mother.
Sure. Okay, so my mother is still alive.
Okay.
She's 80. She'll be 81 next month. And she was very close to her mother, who was the human computer. And
Got it.
so my grandmother was born in 1907,
Okay.
which for people who don't think about history the way that I think about history, that's really only 60 years after emancipation,
Right.
less than 60 years actually. And so, she's a part of that, like, first generation of, non-enslaved people. And
Right.
so she was fortunate enough to go to Talladega,
Okay.
and she majored in chemistry.
Wow.
She met, which is amazing, right?
That's
She,
amazing that
and
she didn't go into education like probably most women of that era did, that were
right.
enough to go to college even.
Right. And so that was her interest. And Talladega, for those who don't know, is in Alabama. She was from Covington, Georgia. After she graduated from Talladega, she went back to Georgia. When she
Okay.
was there, she met a young man who was also interested in education, and that was my grandfather. And
Okay.
so she married my grandfather, who was originally from Virginia. They went back to Hampton, and my grandfather was a professor at Hampton, which was then called Hampton Institute. He was the head of the trade school. And
Wow.
so she had 3 kids, back to back, essentially, I don't know, 1934, 35, and 36.
Hmm.
And then World War II broke out. So when World War II broke out, people from NASA originally started hiring white women
Hmm.
because the men had gone to war. What
Right.
happened was is that they ran out of the white women. And
Hmm.
so they said, okay, there's this historically black college. It's not far from here. Let's go over there and see if there are any black women who have enough education that they can do this work.
Right.
My grandmother volunteered, and she ended up being in the first class. There were 11 of them. And there was a story about it in the Norfolk Journal, which was the black newspaper. So
Okay.
white people didn't even know that this had happened.
Right.
And that photo from the Norfolk Journal is actually the cover of Margot's book. So my grandmother is the lady in the front row on the right. Yeah, so
I'm gonna
it's
go
pretty
look at. I'm
amazing.
gonna go look at my
It's
copy.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty
Amazing.
amazing. And so what I learned when I took my tour of NASA was that originally the building that they were put in, one of the reasons why we say they were hidden, is a building that there weren't other people in. It originally didn't even have a bathroom that very first year.
Wow.
Yeah. So and so given the fact of the times, I think it was more like a warehouse or a shed. The
That's
building
what I
doesn't exist anymore. Now, I have the blueprint from NASA I included in my book here, that when they moved to another building, they were forced to go into a cafeteria that says on the blueprint, colored dining, white dining. And the
wow.
way it worked was is that there were doors on each side. And so the white women never saw the black women. So if you were to ask white people in the 1940s if black people worked at NASA, they would say, of course not, that's crazy. But they weren't lying. They didn't even know.
Wow. Was it supposed to be secret, or they just felt no need to share that information?
Well, this is where my legal training comes in. It was
Okay.
secret because it was illegal.
It was illegal?
It was illegal. So the land that NASA was on was legally Chesterville Plantation until 1950.
Hmm.
And desegregation did not happen until 1954. So for the first 11 years that my grandmother was working there, it was against the law. And of course, NASA is a federal project. So it wasn't that it was a secret, it was a complete violation.
Wow. See the things that you learn when you tune into Be Wise. And in the Hollywood sanitized version, which most people are gonna read, are gonna go to the movie, right? Then a small
Sure,
number are gonna read both of you all's books. But
sure.
that's amazing to me.
I mean,
That's
that's
amazing.
it. I mean, what's interesting is that I was invited to the Hampton premiere and
Okay.
I couldn't go because I didn't want to cancel my class at McAllister. But my
Mhm.
godmother went and she told me that there's a scene in the movie where Kevin Costner gets rid of the colored sign for the bathroom. Well,
Right.
not only is that completely not true, Margot shares in her book that it was my grandmother who stole the colored signs. And the reason why I know that is that my mother said she would bring them home. And she said my grandparents would fight about it at the dinner table all the time because my grandfather was so scared that my grandmother was going to get fired and they needed the money.
Wow.
And so Hollywood, makes it so that like, the white guy saves the day.
Right.
And, my grandmother was like this 4'11" feisty woman that wasn't going to, take it anymore.
Right. Wow. I knew that. And so for those of you who are watching, I have been kind of following this whole story most closely with Margot. And then I came across Duchess actually several months ago. Um,
Okay.
I invited you to join Be Wise, and then that was it until last week. So, I've been following, Margot around, and I knew she had, it had been announced that she was, in the process of writing the book. And then a couple weeks later, the movie was announced. And I used to live in Atlanta. So I immediately
Okay.
reached out to her and I said, I've got friends and people in Atlanta if you need support. So, the movie wrapped in May. Margot, like, literally was down to the wire with that book.
Yeah.
Like, she was like, okay, I'll call you tomorrow because I got to get this book out. I'm like, okay, Margot, I want you to get the book out. Don't let me be the one to
Yeah.
hold you up. So I knew that there was no way that they could do, her book complete justice because they didn't
Oh,
have the
yeah.
book, right? They didn't have
Right.
a book to use. And then we know Hollywood has to wrap things up in a nice, positive, framework. And for those of you who are interested in movies, anything from Mississippi Masala, it always has to have a white protagonist, right? That
Sure.
comes and saves the day. So I knew kind of, without having even finished Margot's book, that some kind of way, somebody, Kevin Costner or Jim Parsons, or I forget the
Right.
young lady who plays the white female manager, was gonna be the savior some kind of way. I knew that. But it's so interesting to hear the real background
Yeah.
stories. And I think for those of us who are working in STEM, it even resonates more because I'm sure there is probably some of us who, would have liked to have done the same thing had we lived in that era. But
Right.
how brave of your grandmother, to take that upon her tiny little self to do.
I come by my feistiness honestly. Everyone says that I was named correctly.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So, your grandmother has a history. Now, how long did she work at Langley?
She worked there for 23 years. So
Okay.
she started working there in 43
Okay.
and she stepped down in 66 because she got very ill and then
Okay.
she passed away in 67.
Wow.
And one of the reasons why I was named after her also was because I was born in 69 and that was the year that we landed on the moon.
Isn't
And
that
that's a true
amazing?
story. Yeah,
That's so
that's a
cool.
true story. My grandmother met John Glenn.
Wow.
And one of the ways that we proved that she was there when it was illegal for it to be there is that my mom loves to save memorabilia. It's one of her favorite hobbies.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things that we love about her, but also she has way too much. So
Mhm.
she dug through her stuff and she found a letter on NASA letterhead thanking my grandmother for 20 years of service. Well,
Wow.
here's the thing. It's dated 63.
Right. So somebody made a mistake and
It's
included
dated 63. And
that.
so there they are admitting that she
Right.
was there in 43 with those 10 other Black women.
Right. That is, it's so amazing, that out of desperation, right? Not the thought that, hey, these are some educated Black women, right? Let's bring them. It was out of desperation. Had
Oh,
they,
completely out of desperation. And they originally put them in something that was like a little bit nicer than a barn.
it
So I mean, it wasn't like they said, oh, welcome,
welcome,
and we take you seriously and you're important. It was more, can you use a slide rule, and we'll check behind you, and we're not sure if you can, and we'll see what's going to
right?
happen, and hopefully the war will be over soon.
Right. One of the points from the movie or the discussions after seeing the movie was, it seems like they were treated so bad, and then someone I
Hmm.
think even asked, what kind of money did they make? And
That's a great question, and that's something that's in my book.
okay, good.
So it's a really important question because when I first started sharing this research at Macalester, some of my colleagues were interpreting it as a story of struggle. And I said to them, but you don't have a reference point because the predominant work for Black women in 1943 was to be a domestic. When you were a domestic, you were paid when they felt like paying you,
Mhm.
and you might have agreed on terms, but the people might change the terms. And
Right,
also, you were in people's homes where fathers, husbands, and sons felt, that they could approach domestics any way they wanted to.
right.
So to get this position, which paid $2,600 a year, that was easily 5 times more than what a domestic made.
Yeah, that was a fortune.
That
Your
was a
grandmother,
fortune,
your grandmother had
$2,600 a year in 1943, which is why my grandfather kept saying, stop stealing the colored sign. You need that job.
now that would have been an interesting part of the movie.
That's what I'm saying. I'm so disappointed. I'm so disappointed that Kevin Costner ends up not just usurping a Black woman's story, but you can imagine, given the fact that, I'm her namesake, that it's a tough pill to swallow.
I can imagine. But we, like I said, we know that they had to not feel bad about what they had really been doing, right? They
Right,
were the ones who, who is the producer of the
right.
who's the distributor of the movie. So, they're not gonna say, oh my gosh, we were horrible, we did these terrible things. And even in talking to some other people, I said, I saw the trailers, the extended trailers, and then of course I saw the movie. And I said, maybe they should have done a little bit more audience research
Sure,
because
sure.
I said of all the scenes to pick to encourage people to come out, I would not have picked those scenes. There were so many better scenes, scenes with Octavia Spencer, I think it's
Yes,
Spencer,
that's her name. Yeah,
that were so much more powerful that, for those of us, and, we've taken over this story, but it's everyone's story, right?
right.
We like to claim, as STEM women, we like to claim that, oh my gosh, this is something that's really personal for us, but really it's everyone's story. But, one of the things I think that resonates the most is, we know exactly those same struggles and how powerful it would have been to show that or show those scenes to encourage people to come to the movie. Now I know what they did. It's
Sure.
time, so everybody wants to feel all warm and cuddly inside, and so you put the kind of what do you call it, kumbaya type
Yeah,
clips on there that speak to the whole, I guess, community, not just, African Americans or African American women, but, there were some parts of that. I don't know how authentic they were to the actual story that I said, now that would have caused me to say, I'm going to see that movie, even if I wasn't in STEM.
Right, right.
So, that's why I love that, you have this book because, those other 11 women have children and families, right?
Right.
There are other stories, that can be told of this experience. And then that generation who came after that, right? So those
Mhm.
women blazed a trail, did things that, no one ever would have imagined Black women would do.
Well, I can talk about that a little bit. So
Okay.
one of the things that made Black women different from the white women who worked at NASA is that when the war ended, we were in an economic boom, and this is when freeways were created and suburbia developed.
Hmm.
And so when the white men came back from war, they were able to get the women, bring them to the suburbs, and they left NASA. And that's the common story of what happens with white women who worked. That's the Rosie the Riveter story. All the
Hmm.
ones that went to the factories, then they go out. What's
Right.
different with the Black women is that the Black men did not come back with the same opportunities as the white men.
That's right.
They were not getting the GI Bill, so they couldn't purchase homes.
Right.
They didn't have education. They had a difficult time getting jobs. And so they still needed the women to work.
Right.
And so the Black women stayed, which meant that there were Black women at NASA in the 70s, right? And so
Mhm.
that's a very different thing that we were there actually the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Right.
So when you get to the middle 70s, you get the second wave of feminism. And that's
Right.
when people like Gloria Steinem come along. And that's when Betty Friedan is saying, oh, white women should be able to join the workforce and get out of suburbia. The
Right.
Black women were consistent. And that makes a really big difference. That's partly why you get Black women at NASA now who are in leadership positions, because there's a longevity there that wasn't broken.
Right. What I find interesting because I was in DC in June, and I said, I know you guys can't wait. I forget what the NASA in DC is called, or right outside of
The
DC.
aerospace, sure.
But I said, I know you can't wait to hear the story, of Katherine Johnson. And they said, who's Katherine Johnson? I was like, no, Katherine Johnson from
Mhm.
Hidden Figures. Well, what's Hidden Figures? And I was like, "Are you being funny?" I just couldn't imagine that here the story
Right.
came out of NASA, and people who were working right at NASA, didn't know about it. Now I've since learned that NASA Langley, certainly in the beginning, felt like it's our story, it's Langley's story, right? So
Right,
the
right.
rest of you
And
all,
that's another difference between me and Margot. So our lives intersect. We were both born the same year. We were
hmm,
both born in Newport News. The
wow,
difference between us, yeah, and so her family is good friends with my cousin's family, lots of overlap. The
mhm,
difference between us is that when I was 2, my dad got a job transfer and we moved to New England. And
mhm,
so I did not grow up in Virginia. I went back at least once every year because that's where all my relatives were.
right,
But Margot is a Hamptonian.
right, right,
Tell a Hampton story. Her father had worked there, and she'd grown up with all these Black women that worked at NASA, that were Girl Scout leaders, that were in her church, that were in her mother's sorority. And so Langley was her point of reference.
right.
When I started doing my research, like for instance, the woman who's in the cover of my book, she was in Maryland.
Hmm.
And so then I started learning also about Huntington, Alabama, and these other places. There's a NASA in the Cleveland area.
Mhm.
And so, what I wanted to do is tell a narrative how comprehensively there were Black women at all the NASAs throughout the country.
Right, right. I think, and I understand there's some pride with you being. I don't know where I'm getting this feedback all of a sudden. There's certainly pride. Where did that feedback come from? Can you hear me?
Yes.
There's feedback. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. We were doing just fine. Okay, we'll struggle through.
Okay.
But you know, there's pride within the Langley community. But there are things going on. I know here in Boston, Space Center had done some work with Southern University in Baton Rouge as far as hiring folks in the 70s. I think it's 60s. So there were so many things going on, with NASA, and that's, for a long time for scientists and engineers, that was the premier job that you get as an engineer.
Yes, I mean, one thing that people don't know about, the Houston area, right? So people always hear the language of, can you hear me, Houston, right? But this Houston, Texas area, one of the things that made the civil rights movement successful there was the collaboration with NASA to desegregate their NASA. That was a part of booming their economy. And so the way that we overcome racism sometimes in America is to frame it in terms of there could be profit.
Okay.
Right? That's what we do. And I mean, think about the 80s, think about Wall Street. And so often when Black people are given opportunities, it's framed in a way that white people will be able to benefit from that. And so that's what Houston, Texas did. Houston said, if we bolster our NASA and if we do it by dipping into the talent pool and don't consider race, we can, beat Russia, this whole Cold War, enter the space race, and we can dominate.
So it had to be a motivation based on financial.
Completely. And not only that, one of the things I do in my book is talk about the importance of the historically Black college, right? And so it's not just the importance of Hampton Institute and Langley, but there's a place in Texas where there are 4 historically Black colleges, all within, I don't know, like 30 minutes. And so that's a place where they were dipping into a talent pool.
That's amazing. So these are some of the facts that have come out of this broader story that I'm so glad that you're sharing in your book, because there's all kinds of different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And as humans, we gravitate, to what's the latest and greatest. But
yeah, I mean, one of the things I discovered was that there were only a few NASAs that weren't in the Deep South. And so what's the relevance of being in the Deep South? That's where the majority of Black people are. And so for NASAs that were in the South to be successful, they needed to consider a Black talent pool. Wow. So if you look at the NASA that's out in California, it's almost completely white.
Right.
You don't have the kind of population there that you do in Texas and Alabama.
That's true.
You look at their NASAs, it's completely different. You also don't have historically Black college in California.
That's true.
Yeah. And so, like I said, in Ohio, there were Black people in Cleveland, and so they were able to tap into that. And then the Maryland one, which is near DC, that's also a highly Black populated space.
Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that I had met some folks in DC and they weren't aware of the story. Is NASA now sharing that? I know they're doing some things associated with Katherine Johnson.
Right.
Are they sharing that with their employees?
I have to say that the archivist at Langley, I want to say her name is Mary Gaynor. She was outstanding. She's a white woman. She was completely transparent, and she told me things that even I wasn't expecting. And so the thing that I learned from being in the actual space of NASA was how far apart these buildings were. Okay. And so when we went into one of the buildings, I said, well, was it segregated by floor? She looked at me like I made no sense whatsoever. And she said, your grandmother would have worked almost driving distance from here.
Wow.
She's like, they didn't let Black people on this side of NASA's campus. And so what you end up finding is that the white women were in East area. The coded language they used so they wouldn't have to say Black women They
Mm-hmm.
started calling them the West area computers. And
Right.
then the people at the top were like, oh, the Black women. So
Mm-hmm.
if you were in some kind of staff meeting and say, well, the information, we can get that from the West area.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people in the room might not know what that meant, but the person who was saying it was like, okay, I'll go over there and get it from the Black women.
Right.
I
Right.
had no idea. I thought that um, the building itself might have been segregated. No, it was the campus was segregated. They came in through different entrances, like through different parking lots.
Mm-hmm. They do kind of feature that in the movie because they
Right,
show.
right, right. So they show, I understand that they show Taraji Henson like, running to get to the bathroom.
Right.
Um, and that is something that I think is so important for young people to realize how difficult it was and the sacrifices that needed to be made.
That's amazing. I think it's important because in today's world, Beyonce, and where it seems like, everything is racially harmonious, right?
Right.
That, just a few short years ago, Beyonce couldn't have existed, right? She
Oh,
couldn't have
yeah.
reached the pinnacle of pop stardom, regardless of her talent. You know, she's not that brown, so even with her look, she probably wouldn't have been able to be as successful as she is, based on the time of the world that we're in. So it's important for children to see that, to know, no, wasn't that long ago that Black people really, had a different experience. I want to know. Here's my question, since we're having telecommunication problems. Did the work that your grandmother and her colleagues do, that shape the opinion that the white people at NASA had of other Blacks? Or did they
You
kind
know,
of feel
I
like, well,
think
these
I think that is an excellent question. I love that question. One of the ways in which my work also is a little different from Margot's is that I know she frames hers in the American dream.
are. Mhm,
I have a section in my book where I talk about Whitey on the Moon. So Gil Scott Heron's, poem Whitey on the Moon,
mhm,
and what he's saying in that for younger folks who are not familiar with this is that we have Black folks struggling and basically inner city deteriorated Black America in the late 60s, and they're paying taxes and the money's going to send Whitey to the moon.
mhm,
And so one of the things I think about in my book is that this is not a trickle down liberation. In my humble opinion, as an American studies scholar, it does not provide the American dream. What it does is provide some opportunities for the most minuscule amount of Black people that you can imagine,
mhm.
right? I mean, if we're a population of 14 million and you're talking about a few hundred Black people, that
Right.
is not a way to socioeconomically lift up the race.
Right. That is not a statistically significant amount of people. And, when I hear, which on one hand, I think Donald Trump's rise, has uncovered this mask of, post-racial, issues that now we see, right? Just below the
Yes.
surface, where a lot of people who still in 2015, think that the white race is better than everyone else, right? And why
Yeah.
are they here in our country? So I think, that's one thing I will say has come out of that. But you're absolutely right. We still have, a few proportional number of minority leadership positions. So it makes it seem like everyone's.
Right. And I mean, I think also one of the things that the movie does, which is a disservice to the story, is the way that the women were cast. So they're casting Janelle Monáe, Octavia Spencer, and Taraji, who are all brown skinned women. One of the things about the women at NASA is that it is clear from the way that they looked that they were already coming from like a free Black privileged class. So, for
Mhm.
instance, My grandmother's best friend was Catherine Pedrew. And when Catherine Pedrew started at NASA, she was sent to work with the white women because she was so fair skinned. When
Mm-hmm.
she looked around and saw that there were white women, she said to them, "Do you realize that I'm colored?" And they were like, "No." And then they said, "Okay, West area."
Mm-hmm.
And so you really are talking about um, the privileged class from the South who are given this rare opportunity. And I think it's important to frame it that way, because if you don't frame it that way, that in this moment of Trump, it'll be very easy for people to say, why couldn't others have done that?
Right.
And it must be because they didn't work hard.
Right. Right.
And what you have is that it's actually structurally and systematically a century of privilege before you even get there.
Right. I think in other areas, not just at NASA. I'm from Chicago, and so anyone who knows me from Chicago knows, the bellman porters who worked on the trains, right? That was a very prestigious job, certainly in the early part of the 1960s, for a Black man to be the porter on this train. And you certainly couldn't work in that position if you were too Negroid looking, right? So I think
Exactly. And people will
stories,
watch.
right? Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, continue.
I was going to say there are many stories of success in the Black community that are wonderful, and I think where one rises, hope gives hope to the rest of us. But I think, to your point, the work that your grandmother did was only limited to her and her friends, right? I probably,
Exactly.
had I been smart and born during that era, probably wouldn't have ever have gotten considered for that. So,
Yeah, I would say most of the computers did not look like Octavia Spencer. The one of the originals who is still alive, you mentioned Katherine Johnson. If you see pictures of Katherine Johnson, it is clear that she is on the lightest end of the spectrum of African Americans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In fact, when the story first, I first heard of Katherine Johnson about this time last year. I was at an event, and her granddaughter had tweeted out that her grandmother had just gotten, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and I was like,
Right.
who is this? So I said, well, what's her name? I'm at a Christmas event with my phone. I couldn't even wait till I got back to the car, and I Googled her, and I looked, and I was like, I thought you said your friend was Black.
There you go. There you go. That's the Catherine Pedrew story.
I said, well, this lady is white. So I was a little confused. I didn't quite get, and then of course I had to go and research the entire story. So, you're absolutely right. I think, that there's so many layers to the story. There's so many, things to discuss. And it's just incredible, all this information that comes out. Wow, we could probably be on here for another 2 hours talking about all these things that, probably the public won't know or learn about, especially those who are limited only to the movie, right? So I'm encouraging people, read as much as you can about this story.
Well, I have something else to encourage people to do that is very accessible. A lot of people are into their technology. People have cell phones. So I have created a digital archive. And for those who don't know what a digital archive is, it's a website that is interactive. It will be on exhibit at the Science Museum of Minnesota. It's launching January 14th, just so that Minnesotans can come and interact with it. But it's live right now. You could pull out your phone and you could go back and forth on it. What it has on it is the blueprint from Chesterville Plantation, showing that it was a plantation before it became NASA. It has the layout from the buildings, showing the colored dining room. It has biographies of women that you haven't heard of that are more than the 3 characters from the movie. It has 3 different lesson plans, so it can be used in the classroom. It has video clips of people from NASA talking about the work there. It talks about the history of segregation in the South. I know that there are middle school kids that don't know that. It emphasizes the importance of the historically Black college. So basically, it's a place to go where if you've read the book or not, or if you've seen the movie or not, you can understand the story, and then there are discussion questions.
Well, that's awesome. Now, to build on that, are you working with schools to get their students to interact with this?
I really am. I mean, so what's interesting is with the timing, the book just came out last week, but everyone where I live knows that it's coming out. And so now I'm working on projects to have my undergraduates at McAllister work with high school students and some junior high school students.
That's wonderful. I think certainly here in Houston, there are so many charter schools and
Mhm.
organizations that are focused on reaching underprivileged or underrepresented groups in STEM that certainly would love this. Kids like anything interactive. So to be able to
Yeah.
go and look and not touch, but go and look at things that are old. I know I love history. I'm probably more fascinated with history than I am engineering. So to be able to go back and look at things, 40, 50, 60 years from now or ago, I would love that.
Yeah, and I mean, this generation is so much more visual than we were that I realized that it's kind of what we're doing right now, right? The video, people love video.
Right.
And so what we're doing right now is something that I will upload on the archive, and people can go to that and say, oh, okay, here's the story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. And, I'm so, I hate that it took this long for the story to come out. Right. But I think everything happens in its own time.
I have to tell you that I did an interview. There's a this wonderful blog site affiliated with the African American Intellectual History Society.
Okay.
And they asked me what the biggest challenge was. And I said the biggest challenge was getting it done, just the way you talked about Margot's, like, I have to finish this up,
Mm-hmm.
and getting it done on the kind of deadline that we were on. That we both got our books done before the movie.
Right.
If you had told me that in 2014, when we were walking around hot July in Virginia and going through all that material, I would have said there's no way in the world we can get this done in 2 years.
Right. It's so funny, certainly for someone like you as an engineer. He's like, okay, let's go. We got these deadlines done. But it's
Right.
so much information, right? And you want to get it right? You want to make sure, and in the writing itself, right? As engineers, we're stating facts, right? We don't really care if it's lyrical or whatever. But when you're doing a story, you have to make sure that it's interesting and compelling. So you can't just say the lady worked on the computer and she made it work.
Right. And I mean that's really where Sue Bradford Edwards came in, because if I were to write it, it would have 600 footnotes, because that's how I was trained. Right. And so Sue is hilarious. Sue would be like, you know what? There's a word called the. Just say the. Right. Because I'd have like 8 adjectives in front of it.
Right.
And so that that was really helpful. But people also don't realize, copyright. My book has lots of photos in it. And there are things that make book production not as quick as, say, some of the work you might be able to do in engineering.
Right. That's right. It's so interesting because it's a story of a very technical industry, right? But an engineer would never have been able to eloquently tell this story. It would have been
yeah.
It would have been 3 pages.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I have so much admiration for, the technical people. Sometimes I wonder why I didn't inherit my grandmother's ability to do math. It was probably, my weakest academic area. But I want people to know that if they're not cut out for STEM, there is a field called the history of science. Someone needs to write the history of science. There are people that need to do the science, but telling this in a way that everyone can understand it, I think that's important.
It is. I mean, that's why you have technical writers, because those of us who are creating and working on these technical things won't be able to communicate with anyone else but ourselves, right? So
Right.
unless you're writing expressly or, just for that demographic, it's going to be boring. It's not going to be interesting. And I think, for those of us who may not have as much, engineers and scientists think we're the smartest in the world, right? We can do everyone's job. No one can do our job, right?
Right.
Until try to do someone's job, right? So, I started BWISE about a year ago, and so I'm the janitor, I'm the marketing person, I'm the social media expert, I'm the event planner, and
Right.
writing copy for things. I'm like, this is really hard. I
Yeah,
don't
that's actually a skill set. It's actually a skill set.
Right. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is not as easy as I thought it was. So, I think, to your point, that it's great. Like I said, it's a compelling book. And what you bring, I think also, from your perspective, is the Black experience and the work that you've done writing Black Lives Matter and all those other things. I think that probably shapes your book as much as everything else, because a white person could have written the story, right? And it probably would have been,
Yeah.
this is what happened here, then this happened, and this is how it ended, right? But there's
And I
so
almost
many
forgot to give a
dynamics.
shout out to someone. So I have to say that the introduction to our book was written by Chanda Prescott Weinstein. And I want to get her credentials correctly. She is one of fewer than 100 Black American women with a PhD in physics.
Yes,
And so that's pretty amazing.
it is amazing.
And so we definitely wanted her perspective in there. But yeah, my training insists that there is discrimination and privilege, and then we have to look at both.
Absolutely, absolutely. I follow Shonda, so I know exactly who she is, and I have a cousin.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's 91. I think they keep a total of the number. I have a
Yeah.
who graduated from Howard. So I have to shout out my cousin Natasha Green, who has a PhD in physics, which I thought I
Wow.
was like, I'm the smartest one in this family until she got a PhD. I was like,
Wow.
okay, all right, you're the smartest one in the family. So, it's an incredible story. And, if you are ever in Houston, we would love to host you. People will be lined up
Most
around
definitely.
to talk to you. If you ever do a book tour, we will make sure, just by as I mentioned earlier, the response in 2 days, 3 days. I reach out to you on Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah, has been
It was
overwhelming.
fast.
2,000, views, on the post that I wrote, featuring, this event tonight. So it's wonderful. I didn't
Wow.
have any, preconceived thought, oh, how many people are gonna want to attend or watch, so to see so many people interested in this story, it's just incredible. And they know there's a distinction between your story and Margot, right? So I think
Oh
for you to
yeah.
be able to say, this is another part of this whole story,
Right.
incredible.
Right.
It's been amazing. So whenever
Well,
you
thank
are
you
listening,
so much.
and maybe we can get you in Chicago. Maybe we need to start small. We've got to be wise
Yeah.
in
Look,
Chicago.
I can go to Houston too. Trust me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we need to have you come. I think people want to, look you in the eye and ask you these incredible
I
questions
would
that
love that. And I could demonstrate the archive, right? Because then, I can just project it from my laptop, and when people see how easy it is to use and how students can learn from it, and that it's fun, then you're doing something.
Well, I'm excited. I hope this will be a long relationship that
Me
BWise
too.
has with you, and I'm looking forward to staying in contact. And we do many more things to share your wonderful book. And so, for those of you who watch, when we have authors on, we always put the book in the bookstore, because if you're like me, You don't write things down. You forget. And so you're like, what was
Right.
that lady's name and what was the name of her book, right? So now you've got a place to go and see the book, and you can get it. It makes a, well, it's not out yet, so I can't say it makes a great Christmas.
It is out. It is out. It released 6 days ago.
So you can have it in your hand for Christmas.
Yes. Yes. You can order it on Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com. It's available.
So for those of you who are still looking for Christmas gifts, I would encourage you to go and get this incredible story from Duchess Harris talking about the broad spectrum of the experience for these Black women at NASA. And she's written it for ages 6 through 12, is that right?
Yes. Yep.
So if you've got some young, well, I won't even say young girls, if you've got children in your life,
right,
you know, that are avid readers, as I was, certainly growing up, this is a wonderful gift, right? They don't need any more toys. They don't need any more clothes. Get them books. Books last with you much longer than clothes and toys do. So please go and support this book. And just will have information on your website. That just is connected to me. So those of us who are my LinkedIn network, please, that just people who want to connect with you.
Oh, most definitely. Sure.
Okay, now don't bombard Duchess, okay? She's a professor. She's got work to do. But
it is all good.
Please feel free to do so through my network. That's just incredible. Thank you so much. You're such a great person for coming on with such short notice. This is incredible. I've learned so much. I can't wait to tell people what I've learned tonight. That's your grandmother's signs.
I'm so glad. I'm going to put my glasses back on now so I can see. All right, so I'm signing off.
Thank you. Thank you,
okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.